It looks like the good news for those that vote for the bill and lose their job as a result of it is that there's a built-in provision that may provide them with some compensation and travel expense when they lose their job as a result of voters finding out what all is in that bill. But that's the kind of thing we've dealt with here. People meaning well, getting their talking points, thinking that they were really telling the truth, coming in here and passionately proclaiming what was put before them, but not reading the bill. That is so important. So when we apply this cynicism, once you know that the people that are pushing this bill are the ones that have benefited 4-to-1 in contributions from these very firms that will be so-called reformed, then you take a more skeptical look at what's in the bill, and we get to find out a little bit more about what's in it. Because obviously some of my friends have not looked at it thoroughly enough to know what's in it and to know that it's really not the financial reform bill that they thought it was. It's more of a financial deform bill, more of another bailout bill, or I would say perhaps we could rename it the Goldman Sachs monopoly bill. A friend across the aisle had a blow-up of some of the monopoly pieces. It applies. That's a perfect display for this financial bailout bill, because it's going to allow certain firms to have monopolies. This bill is going to create some monopolies. So one of the truths about this bill is that there are backdoor bailouts. Despite the rhetoric, there are backdoor bailouts in this financial deform bill, or the Goldman Sachs monopoly bill. The Dodd bill from the Senate, it codifies these backdoor bailouts that were used by the Federal Reserve to pump money into Bear Stearns. It also was used by the Federal Reserve to pump money into AIG, into Fannie Mae, to Freddie Mac. And then this thing that troubles me so deeply, Systemic Risk Council. It's in the bill. A Systemic Risk Council. I was hoping 2 years ago as we got into the TARP business, and some of us actually read that disastrous bill and could see that this was just not something that should be done in America. Some of us hoped, well, since we've seen that Secretary Paulson is completely sold out to Goldman Sachs, it's an effort to bail out the buddies of Goldman Sachs. Yes, we're bailing out AIG, apparently. He wanted to do that, and lo and behold, billions of dollars turn around and go straight from AIG over to Goldman Sachs. So it did help his friends, but some of us had hoped that Mr. Bernanke might be the level head in all of this, but having been in meetings with Mr. Bernanke and having watched him closely on television and read so many of his comments, it appears that he has been caught up as well in this power grab and in this lofty ivory tower he's been placed in with this incredible amount of power without accountability. You know, it was Stalin who said, with power, dizziness. And we've seen some of that dizziness in the way these financial markets have been handled by people at the top. But it appears from the things Mr. Bernanke has been saying that he has bought in hook, line, and sinker into this systemic risk business because he could get to say, you know what, this is who I'm naming the systemic risk. And when the federal government says this firm or this bank, this company is too big to fail, that means the federal government will not let them fail. That means they can go in the red and run their competition out of business, knowing the federal government will not let them fail, but their competitors don't have that assurance? That's why you might as well call it a monopoly bill, because it's going to allow firms to become monopolies. And we saw after the TARP firm, boy, Goldman Sachs got to be a bank in addition to being everything else to all people. And one of the things that concerned me as I read through the TARP bill, when I got toward the part toward the end where it said that it was raising the debt ceiling by $1.3 trillion, and we knew that it was a $700 billion bill, well, why would you need to raise the debt ceiling $1.3 trillion if it's a $700 billion bill? And of course, we know there was $100 billion added to the bill in order to buy enough votes to get it to pass. So it's an $800 billion bill, and yet it raised the debt ceiling $1.3 trillion. Well, there's a half a trillion dollars there for some reason that was built into that. So I went back through and I reread the bill, and I kept pleading and begging with other colleagues, please just read the bill. You'll see we don't do this in America. We don't give one man $700 billion and say, go play with it and fix us and make us better. We never have done that in America since we've had a Constitution. With that qualification, there was a man in American history that had that type of power that was given by the Continental Congress by a bill that was passed December 27, 1776. His name was George Washington. This was an humble man. This was a man who made the statement, people unused to restraint must be led, they will not be drove. And so like in the Battle of Trenton, or in that 1755 disastrous ambush that the British walked into and didn't listen to Washington, who was in his early 20s. We've seen pictures over and over painted by those there that Washington didn't do as I was taught in the Army, that commanders are supposed to normally stay at the back and command from the back and coordinate things. Washington, in some of the worst battles, knew he needed to be out front so people would see him and do the right thing. There was one soldier after the Battle of Trenton that wrote home talking about how afraid he was with so many people dying. And he said, but when I saw bullets flying around that priceless head of our great general, encouraging us as he went, sir, I thought not of myself. Now that was a leader. It's not Hank Paulson we're talking about. That's not a leader. We're talking George Washington. And when the Continental Congress was afraid that the people who had signed up for 6 months enlistment around July 4th, around the time of the Declaration of Independence, and their enlistment was coming up, they got word these guys may not re-enlist. So they passed a bill basically giving Washington the power to make whatever contract, pay whatever he needed to pay. We didn't have a Constitution yet. But they knew this man and said, you fix it. And they sent a cover letter that in essence was saying that we know you well enough to know our liberty's not at risk, and when you have no further need of this power, you'll give it back. And he did, like no man has ever done before or since in history. But in 1787, we got a Constitution. Since that Constitution, we have never allowed one man to do what Hank Paulson and now Tim Geithner are being allowed to do, and with Bernanke's assistance. It's a disaster. Systemic Risk Council. We're going to decide who wins and who loses in America. And you want us on this side of the aisle to vote for this bill? And you call it a financial reform bill? It isn't. This is not reforming things. This is taking us away from the free market principles from which we have been running for far too long. That TARP bill took us away from it, and some